From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. As USDA tries to get a grasp on the shakeup in world trade, we hear firsthand from a Ukrainian farmer.
There is a deficit of diesel and gasoline for the farms.
Fertilizer prices here at home are taking a toll on farmers' outlooks. The story behind Big Ben.
At age 4, the farmers would take him to local county fairs and festivals to show him off.
We're traveling the countryside with Andrew McCrae. And in John's world,
who's going to call the game?
Now for the news that moved the markets this week. From questions about South America's crop to the crisis in Ukraine, the world trade picture is changing. USDA updating its supply and demand estimates in the latest report. Grain prices seen green immediately after the report. On the U.S. side, USDA lowering its feed use estimate for both corn and wheat, but increasing ethanol use for corn. USDA also boosted its U.S. soybean export forecast. Now looking at South America, USDA lowering its Brazil soybean crop estimate by 2 million metric tons to 125 million on Friday. The agency raised the corn estimate to 116 million metric tons in Brazil. That's up 1 million from last month. USDA left Argentina's corn and soybean crop both unchanged. And looking at Ukraine, USDA reduced the country's wheat exports by 1 million metric tons, but increased corn by 4.5 million. We'll have much more coming up in our marketing roundtables. Well, more acres could be going back into production. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack says only 1.8 million of the 4 million expiring CRP acres are being re-enrolled in the program. He also said new contracts in the Conservation Reserve Program for around 800,000 acres would be offered. It adds up to a net reduction in CRP of around 1.5 million acres. Vilsack says the numbers prove there is no reason for him to open CRP for emergency cropping because of the war in Ukraine. I asked Farm Journal Washington analyst Jim Wiesmeyer about that.
I think he said the best policy response he could have given from my perspective when he said, quote, the market basically responds to signals and the farmers are making the decision. In other words, he doesn't want to go into the CRP and make a decision to have farmers bail out of those contracts. He's saying let the market determine that.
Now, Wiesmeyer says this will be a topic in the upcoming Farm Bill debate. Well, fertilizer price shock is happening in the countryside. That's as fertilizer prices are continuing to skyrocket across the country. Take a look at this graphic from Josh Linville at StoneX. It shows the prices of anhydrous ammonia since October of 2020 at $310 per ton. And now they're averaging more than $1,400 per ton. So what's causing it? Well, right now experts say it's due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Texas A&M Agricultural and Food Policy Center conducting a study earlier this year that was based on fertilizer prices in October 2021. And even though prices have dramatically increased even since then, they say that supply chain disruptions are causing the problems. Well, with the fight for fertilizer on around the world, one old-fashioned method is a hot commodity right now: manure. Reuters reporting some livestock and dairy farms have found a fertile side business selling it to grain growers. Business is so good that some cattle feeders that sell it report they are sold out throughout the end of the year. Some even have a waiting list. But ag specialists warn that it isn't a fix-all. They say there's not enough supply, transportation is expensive, and the prices for manure are also rising thanks to strong demand. Plus, it is highly regulated. A new study says a substantial portion of beef that is advertised as raised without antibiotics may in fact contain antibiotics. The study conducted by researchers at George Washington University was published in Science magazine. They tested urine samples from cattle that were destined for a raised without antibiotics marketplace. They found about 15% of the cattle tested positive. They reportedly tested a total of 699 cattle from 312 feedlots and 33 different raised without antibiotics certified feed yards. For more on this, make sure you check out the article on drovers.com. The EPA says it is rejecting 36 petitions from oil refiners requesting exemptions from biofuel blending laws for the 2018 compliance year. However, the agency will not force 31 of those to comply with the laws. The Renewable Fuels Association calling EPA's decision on Thursday a hollow victory for the biofuels industry. Well, the cost and availability of inputs, well, those are both weighing heavily on farmers' minds right now. That's according to the latest Ag Economy Barometer from CME Group and Purdue University. The barometer now at a reading of 113. That is the weakest farm sentiment reading since May of 2020. To put that in perspective, at that time, corn was at $3 per bushel. The March reading was 12 points lower than the previous month and 36% lower than in March of last year. Well, USDA releasing its first crop progress report of the season, and the news is not good when it comes to the winter wheat crop in the U.S. It reports that only about 30% of the crop is rated good to excellent, with 36% rated very poor to poor, the lowest rating in over a decade. Last year at this time, 53% of the crop was rated good to excellent, and at last report, 32% of the crop was in severe drought conditions. That's it for the news. Well, those in the drought-stricken South and West battled more fires this week, along with some very strong winds. We'll have a check of weather with Matt Yurosavec next. Time now for a check of weather with Matt Yurosavec. Matt, a very active weather week, and even though it's early in some areas, it's keeping farmers from kicking off the planting season this year.
Yeah, Tyne, that's right. We've got a kind of a delayed start to planting for a lot of folks, and that's because, one, the drought, and two, a lot of rain falling in the eastern half of the country. Still got some drought conditions, though, abnormally dry there in parts of the mid-Atlantic, down into the southeast coast, but from southern Louisiana through Texas, up into Oklahoma, New Mexico, all the way up into the northern parts of the Plain States there and back towards the west coast. A lot of drought conditions. We saw some very slight improvements in some of our southern areas this week, but not a lot. Again, we're going to be a bit more active, though, as we head into this next week, and that could help some of these drought conditions, but again, staying very dry back there in the west. And here's a look at the root zone. Still very moist soil up through Wisconsin into parts of Michigan, and then right on down through the Mississippi River Valley there, all the way down into the Gulf Coast states. But you can see right here, drier conditions popping up in important planting areas like parts of Ohio, parts of Pennsylvania, all the way down into the Carolinas as well. And then again, dealing with those drought-stricken areas from Texas, Oklahoma, up to Kansas and Nebraska, and then all the way back towards the west coast. Very, very dry soil. Just some higher elevation snow. The one area we are seeing some of that blue on the map is up there in the extreme Pacific Northwest. So taking a look here at our jet stream, it's going to be very mild starting off the week in portions of the east and still mild down here in the southwest. But notice this dip in the jet stream. That's going to come in, and what that is going to do is bring a couple of storm systems. The first one could be bringing the chance for severe weather across the middle of the country here. And then as that swings on through, it's going to bring a lot of moisture along with it. But notice that dip in the jet stream, we're going to see a few more systems follow this one in as we head towards the second half of the week, keeping things very active in the west, but also pretty active along the east as well. So here's a look at Monday, April 11th. We've got a system moving up into parts of the Midwest and the Great Lakes, bringing some showers, some thunderstorms, though, possible down in parts of the south, with another low moving through parts of Texas and Oklahoma. And then back in the west, we are going to be seeing cooler conditions, some higher elevation snow there in the northern Rockies, and also some more rain with another system moving onshore from the Pacific. Meanwhile, staying pretty warm in the west and warm and sunny out ahead of that system in the east. Here's a look at Wednesday. Bigger storm system. We got a couple of lows here. Showers and thunderstorms with the chance of some of that severe weather here in the center of the country. It's going to be warm out ahead of it, and then back to the west, some snow possible on the northern side of that system. Staying cooler and mild back in the southwest. And here's a look at Friday. That's one system gets on out of here. Another one pops up, though, bringing a chance for more thunderstorms. It'll be mild in behind, and then we've got more snow showers moving through parts of the Rockies, and another system set to bring more rain and mountain snow back to the west as we head towards next week. So that's a look at those temperatures this week, below normal for the west and above normal in the east. Meanwhile, the precipitation much above normal for most of the country except for the extreme southwest. That's a look around the country. Time. Now we're going to send it back to you.
Thanks, Matt. Well, USDA's first crop progress report of the year showed planting is just getting started. So when does the market really shift its focus from demand to supply and weather? Mike North and John Payne join me next.
Got equipment to sell privately but tired of scams and hassles? Visit MachineRepeat.com and click Sell Mine. MachineRepeat.com, the simple and secure way to buy and sell equipment online.
Here now with John Payne as well as Mike North to go over the WASDE report that USDA released on Friday. John, immediately after the report, saw some negative price action, then rebounded quickly. It wasn't like this report was overly bullish. So what was the market trading on Friday?
It's a good question. I thought the wheat numbers specifically weren't anything really to write home about. Didn't get a whole lot of indication as far as what direction they're thinking in regards to global supplies. Yes, there's some problems, obviously, who's going to export what, but the total numbers really are still there, and I think that was reflected today. No weather was impacted in wheat, so you still are left with a pretty big stocks number, and we're up here above $11 as I'm talking to you. So at this point in time, the market I think is rallying on more than just USDA here. I think the USDA is probably taking a little bit of a secondary stance to a market driver, and there might be something here in Russia, the Ukraine, as we head into the weekend. Folks just don't want to be short.
Yeah, Mike, so when you look at the Russia-Ukraine situation, did we get any answers? Is there any indication of where USDA's head's at right now when it comes to the impact the war could have on global grain supplies?
Well, if you look at what they did in today's release of the WASDE, we ultimately raised the domestic feed usage and lowered the export numbers, which all kind of falls in line with what we would expect. But they made no changes really that were sizable enough to really shake anybody up. Further, they didn't lower production at all. So as we talk about where things are at, I think it's important to realize that we're just kind of moving things in alignment with where the market's already at. I think to John's point, there's either an idea out there that there's something more coming with this conflict, or I think you could also say that now that we've got this report behind us, I think a lot of people might have been waiting for any sort of surprises or anything that might have been an unknown. And now that there isn't any, now I can proceed on as planned and add to this already long position that I have and keep trying to get in front of this market.
John, we know that Russia has been able to export a little. Ukraine has not. USDA did make some revisions there. But when you look at the wheat situation globally, we know wheat conditions here are poor. I mean, the look from USDA earlier this week just showed how poor things are. We have a pretty good handle on winter wheat around the world right now, right? So what is the biggest question when it comes to wheat prices? And are you concerned that we could have a lot of downside risk?
Well, if the war ends, and I kind of go about my life nowadays, just not thinking I don't know anything. I read the news, obviously, and I see the headlines, but I try not to put too much stock in them. So, in the realm of expectations and what could happen, I mean, we could see ceasefire, in the next couple of weeks, a long range of peace talks. People argue over who's going to win. And in the meantime, global harvest moves on. We get stuff planned for next year. And then maybe the war begins down the road again. So those are things I think that would put wheat in the higher price camp. When you look at export sales, and then the report today, I mean, we're not moving a whole lot of wheat. The U.S. is not stepping in and becoming this huge provider to the world of supply. It's just a number that sits out there and kind of cushions everything. So until that happens, it's hard for me to want to get real bullish here above $11, even with the weather is what it is.
Yeah, and when you look at South America, there were a couple of revisions there. USDA did lower the Brazilian soybean crop, but Mike, still not to a level that a lot of analysts are at right now.
Well, and I think, as you look at the play here, they were really quick to take cuts to the number, a couple of months ago. They've slowed down as we have all started to get closer to this 123 to 126 camp that so many different people find themselves in right now. And I don't know that you are going to see the USDA, rush to catch up with other people. Furthermore, it's not their job. It's their job to put out their best estimate. And, we're all getting close enough now where, with everyone within a couple of million metric tons, you could argue that we're, about as far as we're going to go right now until we get far enough along to really be able to look back and say, okay, this is what the absolute number is. So yeah, some small cuts there, but also with that, a little bit of a hike on the corn number, which with the improving weather conditions there really speaks to that potentially larger crop that's coming down the pipe, and that could be a big story as we go into our own growing season for corn.
Now, USDA also making some revisions to the feed usage side of things, so we will talk about that as well as meat production overall and the latest forecast there. We'll do that later on U.S. Farm Report. Well, the impacts of the pandemic are still being felt along the supply chain, as we've been talking about on the show, but it's also causing shortages in areas you least expect. Here's John Phipps.
Yeah, the old shipping department is working overtime. A few weeks ago, I talked about why the trucker shortage is a mirage. There are lots of qualified drivers, but it's just a crummy job, inadequate pay, and dismal working conditions. I suspected then that low unemployment would uncover more jobs that people really hate doing. I didn't see this one coming. Referees and umpires. There is a serious shortage of referees for youth level, that's below college, sports. The worst is for hockey and football, but almost every high school and organized leagues are trying to find officials for games. For football, athletic directors are being forced to schedule some on a different time other than the sacrosanct Friday night. An epiphany occurred to thousands of referees during COVID. Not only were games canceled, many officials who are mostly older, even retired persons, were leery of the risk for older people when the games then restarted. This forced absence had several consequences. First, referees who had counted on that extra income found much easier and more lucrative alternate jobs that they prefer. Many of the older ones discovered they could do just fine without that income, especially factoring all the travel time. Another reason is illustrated by this timeless joke that probably originated with comedian Henny Youngman. A man goes to the doctor. He tells the doctor, "It hurts when I do this." The doctor replies, "Don't do that." Ba-dum-bum. Many officials discovered how little they missed dealing with obnoxious players, coaches, and especially parents, and took the doctor's advice. This is particularly true for hockey, which at every level has become a brawl waiting to happen. Attending any high school basketball game will demonstrate that good sportsmanship has devolved down to not carrying a weapon. Officials found life without insults hurled from the stands or abuse from the bench was pretty good and voted with their feet. At the college level, the problem is much less severe, again, due to better pay, but an aging group of referees at that level with fewer younger officials rising through the ranks points to future difficulties. In my recent Top Producer column, The Avoidance Alternatives, I speculated how COVID let us see what life is like with fewer people to hassle us. Many of us won't be going back to previous social event schedules, or at least we're going to be choosing the circumstances when we do be around people.
Thanks so much, John. All right, when we come back, Machinery Pete is with us for this week's Tractor Tales.
Hey, welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're headed to the Show Me state of Missouri to check out a John Deere A.
This is a 1951 A John Deere high crop. The good thing about it, they didn't make very many of them, and I suppose that a few of them was enough, probably. I drove that on a tractor cruise 80 some miles. I couldn't walk for about 3 days. Ride's rough and it steers hard, but they're kind of an attraction because there was so many of them made, and they used them for vegetable. They didn't make a great many of them. I think 200 and some odd of them. They are hard to find, and they get kind of attached to them. This guy had it in the salvage yard, and that was the place for it. In that salvage yard, it was really rough. It had been come from the West Coast, and the sheet metal was all completely eat off of it. Bought it over in Kansas, and had a trailer over there, and so we bought it. I've spent more money on it than it's worth. But they like them. People like them. We worked on it off and on, I suppose, maybe 2.5 years. But the darn thing always would run really good, and you could just about count. You know, she just pop, 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 and really was a good running thing, but it was a miserable driving thing.
Still to come, it's been 6 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine. So what's it like for those still in Ukraine? We'll hear firsthand from a Ukrainian farmer next.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, it's been more than 6 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, and for Ukrainians, it's caused chaos and devastation. And it's also causing a wave of unknowns around the world. But for those still there, what is it like to actually farm in Ukraine right now? We get a firsthand view this week from the fields of Ukraine. As the crisis in Ukraine continues, farmers in Ukraine are staring at a stark reality.
Part of Ukraine is occupied by Russian troops, so many farmers don't have today access to their fields. And when you say no access, it means you can hear the shelling, you can see the missiles, and some tractors can get on the mines which are in the field, and that's the most dangerous situation.
Nick Gorchuk farms in Kyiv and recently spoke to Farm Journal's Clinton Griffiths. He says as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, he and his family were forced to evacuate. And after 24 days away, only Nick returned to the farm.
There are several challenges we're now facing when it comes to the season. At this moment, we should be in the field, and we should be putting some fertilizer to winter wheat, for example. But we cannot do it because in those areas which were under Russian occupation, we find mines in the field, or we find some rockets that did not explode because they were too old, maybe. And for this reason, we need to wait until the war officially is over and we can get some special help to clean the fields from mines.
But in other areas of Ukraine that haven't been occupied, he says farmers are in the field, even trying to drill some early crops. But even then, resources and inputs are a major unknown.
Recently, most of attacks have been on diesel and petrol stations, and we find a lot of explosions in those places. And so there is a deficit of diesel and gasoline for the farms. And farmers have problems also with fertilizer and availability of crop protection. And that will be, I would say, very challenging, even for those areas where there is no Russian occupation in Ukraine.
Just this week, Ukraine's president accused Russian forces of deliberately targeting the country's essential food supplies.
At least now, we estimate that 25% of the area will not be planted. But that's one problem. Another problem we see at the moment that some farmers are not thinking about planting because we don't know where we will sell our crops.
Nick says ports along the Black Sea are being blocked by Russian forces, which is yet another hurdle for Ukraine.
For example, in a normal year, Ukraine would be exporting 3 to 4 million tons per month of grains. Now we exported for last month only 800 to 900,000 tons.
It's a crisis that has the world on edge, and now a realignment of trade may be underway. On Monday, China made its largest buy of corn since May of 2021.
The purchase has been rumored for 30 or 45 days about China potentially doing some corn business, and probably as symbolic as anything, given the timing. I think a lot of people suspect that this could be just the beginning of a trend potentially of them trying to fill some of the lost Black Sea supplies due to the Ukrainian conflict.
Even if the purchase is a possible sign China is concerned about world grain supplies, the total impact is far from known.
I would contend that for wheat, we have a better handle than where we sit with corn at the moment. when I look at the wheat crop, especially the wheat that was left to be exported, it was primarily in Russia. Out of the two countries, Russia had more to export, and we have seen wheat leave Russia, and I think that's what's kind of tampered down this wheat market a little bit.
Ukraine ranks 9th in the world for wheat production and 6th for corn, and is the top sunflower seed supplier in the world.
I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a producer in a country where a war breaks out in your wheat field. I can't even imagine what that's like for them. It's all the uncertainty around financing and getting input products has to be incredibly challenging for them that we just frankly can't relate to here.
It's a crisis hitting far beyond just agriculture, as Ukrainians say it will have a lasting impact no matter when and how it ends.
Today is that psychologically this generation of children, they will never be like they've been before the war.
Now, the Wall Street Journal reported this week the situation has actually sparked a global shortage of sunflower oil, which is pushing prices of other edible oils to record highs. And it's another factor that could fuel more food inflation. All right, we need to take a quick break, and then our marketing roundtables will pick back up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator, it's not just any closing wheel. Reach your yield potential. Pre-order by April 30th with coupon code USFR for $2 shipping per wheel.
All right, welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Rejoining me, Mike North, as well as John Payne. John, when you look at South America, before we move off of USDA's forecast when it comes to South America, as Mike had said earlier, they did make some revisions to Brazil's corn crop. It sounds like the Safrinha crop is better than what we initially expected, but is that kind of already baked in to traders' expectations?
Well, it certainly looks like it. I mean, I think the theme I have here going forward is the USDA is, I don't say they don't matter because their opinion on acres certainly does, but I think the global prices that we're seeing being paid, like we're no longer price makers, we're price takers. And I think, the lack of supply in the short run is putting the markets to levels where the USDA really is just simply trying to explain them away. I don't think, as Mike said, it's not their job to try to predict, it's try to follow. And I think we've priced in the worst case scenario. I think on the soybean side, and just to finish with Brazil, there's more acreage coming. And that's really where, from the standpoint of forward contracting, any kind of contracting you've done in this kind of market, you've been wrong, basically. I mean, I think I'm pretty safe to say that. But now when you look forward at what could come on here, might be some opportunities to try to lock in, very good premium for the bushels, not only this year, but a year from now. Because if you catch a good bean crop, I think the story can look a lot different.
Well, USDA lowering its feed usage estimate, Mike, but for both wheat and corn, but increasing ethanol use for corn. But at the same time, when you look at total red meat production, they were looking at higher production on the beef side, lower production on the pork side, and bigger production on the milk side. So when you look at on the dairy side, so when you look at how all of this shakes out, are there any concerns when it comes to how these livestock numbers could play out and the impact on feed use?
Yeah, I think we've obviously had a big run of the bird flu as that's moved through all the different flyways of the United States. 27 million layers now confirmed and having to be destroyed. Reality is that you might see a little bit of a shuffling of the deck here, but I don't know that you're going to necessarily see a growth in feed usage because if we can get rains, moving through the Midwest, a lot of people are going to try to put cattle on grass. They're going to try to keep them off of corn. There's just not enough justification here to be feeding $7.5 to $8 corn if you have grass. So I think USDA trying to maybe get in front of some of that. But all the way around, the step they made today falls in line with really what we should expect given everything that we see. Higher fuel prices are going to attract alternate uses. Ethanol has a nice run there, but at the same time, feeding corn to cattle, if I've got alternates on that side, I'm going to go the other way. So I wouldn't look for a growing balance sheet. I think they're on par with what one should expect out of them with regard to feed.
John, with everything going on around the world, with all the question marks that we have right now, Do you think the market does switch its focus and shift its focus to weather, and that really will move prices this year like it can typically do? Or, is it just a different situation this year?
Well, it's certainly a different situation this year, but weather matters. I mean, this is really the difficulty of row crop farming, and really the estimates of anything in regards to physical. You can't fake it, and we don't get multiple chances like the guys in the crude oil patch to go over and turn on production, turn off production. So, I think there's logistical problems that are going to snarl us. That'll be different this year. Obviously, the war is a problem in general, and there's one other thing that we really haven't talked about. And I think this is more on the bean side. It's COVID. COVID in China right now is as bad as it was in 2010. I don't think I have to break news on that. Or I'm sorry, 2020 rather. And I think my fear is that when they reopen, they're going to join the party. So, we're doing all this growth and inflation in commodities with China essentially growing at like 5%, which is essentially an inflation for or a recession for them. They start growing at 7% again, the pie's going to shrink real quickly. So this is a tough market to trade, and especially when the weather doesn't cooperate.
Mike, a lot of upside risk, a lot of downside risk, but when you look at it, what do you think is the biggest risk that we watch over the next few weeks?
Well, I go back to one of John's comments earlier, and the uncertainty of everything really presents the greatest risk. We really, from one day to the next, don't know what to expect. There's just no, trend line, if you will, of news and, proceedings. Every day is a shakeup. And so you really can't try to make any rock solid sense of things. And that potential turn at any moment, I think, is the thing that's of greatest concern right now.
Thank you so much for joining us this weekend. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report.
Find farm equipment on Machinery Pete's April 19th online auction. No reserve, no buyer fees. Start bidding now at auctions.machinerypete.com.
Well, there's one steer that drew quite the fame more than a century ago. Some even calling the steer an object of wonder. This weekend, we travel the countryside with Andrew McCrae to find the story behind Big Ben.
Beef producers are usually looking for an efficient, high-quality steer to feed. Perhaps none was better than a calf raised near Kokomo, Indiana.
Old Ben was born in 1902. He was born on the farm owned by John and Mike Murphy.
The offspring of a Hereford bull and a shorthorn cow, Ben soon became a steer, but his rate of growth was astonishing. He weighed 125 pounds at birth and was gaining 100 pounds per month. Ben's owners realized they had a steer that was more valuable than something for future steaks and hamburger.
At age 4, the farmers would take him to local county fairs and festivals to show him off on exhibit, and to the Indiana State Fair, where he was shown annually for people just to see and to be amazed.
At 4 years of age, Ben tipped the scales at 2 tons. He had become such a celebrity that a local railroad ran a spur route to the farm to help with his travel circuit.
And we do know that there were some circus owners and sideshow owners that were interested in buying him, but they refused their offers.
Ben was quite an attraction, drawing crowds wherever he went. But a winter incident put an end to those shows.
And then in 1910, that February, he was 8 years old, and unfortunately there was an accident. He slipped on some ice, broke his leg.
It was agreed that Ben should be put down. Veterinary science in 1910 was not what it is today, but his farmer owners had a taxidermist preserve Ben for future generations to see. At the time of his death, Ben was 16 feet from nose to tail, 6.5 feet tall at his shoulder, and weighed close to 4,800 pounds. Eventually, Ben was acquired by the city of Kokomo. A pavilion was built in the city's Highland Park, where Ben resides today. Old Ben is truly a Big Ben, the largest steer on record.
Yes, as far as we know, that world record still remains. Back in, I believe, the 1960s, Ripley used him in an exhibit of Ripley's Believe It or Not, which the city allowed. But as far as we know today, that record remains.
Today's cattlemen are still looking for the best genetics to produce fast-gaining animals. But over a century later, it's Old Ben that still tops the record books as the world's largest steer. Traveling the countryside in Kokomo, Indiana, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Andrew always has quite the stories, and you can see more of his American countryside travels on the Farm Journal YouTube channel. All right, up next, the balance or rebalance of trade.
What happens if the ag trade balance goes negative?
Well, John's commentary last week sparked quite the response. Questions and comments are actually still coming in, but one viewer wanted to know more about the balance of ag trade.
This is from Darrell Boone in Wabash, Indiana. For as long as I can remember, U.S. ag exports have been the bright and shining star of U.S. foreign trade, one of the few sectors to have a positive trade balance. Do you believe this forecast, which was for a negative ag trade balance this year, is correct? And if so, what happened and why? And what are the implications for farmers? Darrell, thank you for writing and for sending your address. By the way, will all the people who sent questions please check that you sent your address with your question? I've got too many of those. First and foremost, any trade balance has dubious value and only limited prediction power. Other than bragging rights, they mean little. There is no trophy or economic advantage for having a positive trade balance in a sector or overall. Some of our best economic periods have been times of significant negative trade balances. In fact, the absolute best way to reduce a trade deficit is to have a recession and a lot of people out of work. If it is important to you, notice that the ag forecast is for it to rise again this year. Second, this trade balance is calculated in value, or dollars, because you can't use volume when you're shipping everything from almonds to frozen beef. And there are some very high value products included in this trade balance that have a big influence, even though they don't pop to mind for most farmers. Spirits, beer, and wine, which I've lumped together as liquor, may be the best example. Look how much they take up. We import lots of wine and beer from Europe and increasingly places like Australia and New Zealand. The same for spirits. This grain, the grain part is mostly from Canada, and the oil seed, remember, includes olive oil, which has become a very valuable import. Finally, ag doesn't seem to me to be the bright and shining star of U.S. trade. It's our service sector, finance, insurance, education, etc. Its trade surplus is over 10 times the ag surplus. Since almost nobody in ag is aware of this fact, how much should we worry about the ag trade balance? Americans tend to focus on stuff, not other forms of trade, but almost 80% of our workers are employed in service industries. A negative balance of trade has long-term implications, according to economists, but during my life, it has indicated our consumers are working and earning and buying, and that our dollar is a highly desired form of wealth.
And keep those questions for John coming. You can email John at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. Well, some friendly competition on agweb.com with the AgWeb Bracket Busters Challenge. And the top bracket actually let us in on her secret to success this year. That's in From the Farm next.
Closed captioning on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by BASF, helping you do the biggest job on earth.
Well, I know many of you avid college basketball fans are sad to see the season come to an end. But for 3 individuals, the season ended with some excitement, taking home the top spots in the AgWeb Bracket Buster Challenge that was sponsored by Case IH. First place went to Marion Dovenberg from Minnesota, who let us in on the secret as to what it takes to have a winning bracket and a winning game plan this year.
Absolutely total luck. I mean, I fill out the bracket just because it's fun.
Now, Marion admits she's not an avid basketball fan, but their family has a friendly competition each year during the month of March with their brackets. And so she's been filling out a bracket for actually nearly 20 years.
I think 2 things gave me a little bit of an edge. One was that I picked Murray State, which was not a high-ranking team. And then I had North Carolina, and they ended up in the final game. which I had. I had them in the final game. And, you know, hardly anyone put an 8th seed in the final game because, you know, the reality is that wasn't the smartest move in the world, but it turned out to be great. So I think between Murray State and North Carolina, it made up for all my other mistakes. So I can live with that.
Marion says it wasn't until the Elite Eight that she realized her bracket was as good as it was.
I have several nephews and brothers that I need to keep the bragging rights going, you know, in perpetuity. It'll go forever. So I've set the bar now, and we'll see if they can jump high enough, but I doubt it. and it's all in good fun. That's what it's about. So it was awesome.
And she did have KU winning it all. And she didn't just finish at the top of the AgWeb Bracket Busters Challenge, but she picked the same teams on the ESPN bracket, and there she finished in the top 1%. We want to congratulate also North Dakota farmer Bill Wagner, who took home the 2nd place spot in the Bracket Busters Challenge this year. And in 3rd place, Deborah Ellis from Pleasanton, Kansas. Thanks so much to Case IH for sponsoring the Bracket Buster Challenge this year. It was a lot of fun, and if you missed out on that fun this year, you can do it next year. Well, from all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.